we'd like to get into the newsroom. Today being Wednesday, that's what we do. And I'd like to first of all welcome our guests, and we'll start off with Patrick Gadara, who's a communications consultant. Karibu sana. A regular, and it's good to have you. Hope you've had a good week so far.
So.
Yeah. Okay, we also have Nancy Booker, who is a lecturer but also a chairperson at the Multimedia University. Great to have you back with us.
Thank you.
Karibu sana. And last but not least, Clay Muganda, who's a features editor with The Standard. Welcome, Clay.
And
Great,
yes,
thanks.
we'll also be joined by Mwaura Shege, who's an MCA Ngara Ward. Is running late, perhaps some of those roundabout issues. But when he gets here, we'll definitely...
He's roundabout somewhere.
He's roundabouting somewhere before he gets here. It is good to have you all. Thank you for joining us. And a lot of what to discuss today, really sad, tragic news of the Garissa attack. I remember we were here Thursday, and actually the show went on past 9 a.m. We stretched it
close
to
to
11. Actually, I ended at 11, just as the details came in on what was happening. Gadara, I'll start with you. I know you never have kind words for us. I saw you tweet after that and said that at least KTN had resisted the urge to go to Afro Cinema O and still keep the coverage going on D-Day, on Thursday.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say I have been a bit impressed by how the press has covered this. Two things. First, of course, I mean, you guys didn't break your coverage, bring us breaking news of Mexican soaps and stuff, which was great. You know, I really loved that. That you stuck by it and tried to explain it. Of course, most of you went off afterwards to do your thing. But for the period I was there, I was quite happy. I think also, which for me is more important, is the press has not, as opposed to what it did during Westgate, you know, has been fairly skeptical about what government has been saying. You know, and it's very quickly that people have picked up on some of the things that were done poorly, you know, and brought them forward. And the kind of reliance we saw in September 2013 on simply what the government narrative is, you know, and the regurgitation of that has not been in evidence. So I think, I mean, on this, I think the press has done a fairly good job.
Okay. Nancy, your take, given that, you know, this happened as things were going on, and I even saw some people tweet, some stations were still having the normal programming, but with a small, you know, headline there, breaking news. How do you think this was rolled out?
I think I would agree with Gadara that the coverage was extensive, and that this is what was happening. I mean, life stopped for many people, and you know, as a result of that uncertainty, there was need, you know, to be updated on what was happening almost by the second, and the press did justice in doing that for us, and you know, I'm happy that KTN, you know, spent time, you know, dwelling on the subject. That this is a big story. It's the life of young people, you know, cut short. There's a lot of uncertainty. There was a lot of uncertainty the whole of Thursday, you know, up until late in the night. And, you know, business cannot go on as usual, you know, irrespective of where it is that it happened. And so I would like to commend, you know, the media for covering this. But having said that, I think one of the things that we must appreciate is that, you know, covering terror is also a challenge for journalists. And in this part of the world, you know, this is something that we are learning, you know, we are learning to do. There could have been certain mistakes. Of course, better coverage as compared to how the Westgate was covered. And, you know, it just points to the direction that, you know, every...
Better in what sense? What Gadara was saying, that there were more questions being asked? Or
more questions being asked, and a lot of interrogation of, you know, what government is saying, what government is doing. A little more sensitivity to victims, you know, I mean, especially the survivors. Of course, I have issues about, you know, certain media houses, you know, bringing, you know, some of the survivors on set, you know, to interrogate them about what happened almost immediately, you know, and not thinking through the trauma that they went through and some of the questions, you know. I think I was watching one of the stations and there was a question about, you know, do you actually think you need counseling? You know, asking one of the survivors. I mean, at that point, really, I don't even think that the survivors, and especially, you know, some of those who were held up for a long time, holed up in the halls of residence for a long time and were rescued later on in the evening, that at that point, you know, a day or two after, that you'd actually be in a position to know whether you actually need trauma counseling or not. But this takes a while. But, you know, in terms of being extensive, I think that coverage, you know, was evident. Yeah. And bringing us to the point of, you know, sensitizing us that irrespective of where this happened, you know, this is still Kenya. It might have been in Garissa, you know, and I must say that when the story was breaking, just like I said a couple of weeks back, that maybe we need to be sensitive to the fact that the northern part of the country is still part of Kenya. And when the story broke out, we still did not have pictures.
Yeah, I saw that.
We didn't have pictures of Garissa.
Actually, it was funny because I was watching pictures on Al Jazeera, but there are no pictures on local TV, which brings a big question on that. But I mean, it's just I know we're jumping clay here a bit, but just one other thing I would like to say is I think as we go forward, I mean, I would want to see more in terms of a grounding in context, you know, of the story. You know, we keep being told, that I was here the last time we were talking about stories evolving, and they never seem to evolve here. But it would be good to start looking at the context, you know, at what happened prior, you know, and what were the lessons that we failed to learn, you know. What are the things that government has not done? For example, the inquiry that was promised that never turned up. You know, and now we've got Kamama, the chair of the parliamentary committee, is actually saying that we have learnt nothing.
All right.
You know, so we need to, I think, go back as press and start interrogating and establishing timelines, etc., that then help the country to say, well, actually, we've got a problem we need to solve.
All right, Claire, and we'll get to you shortly. Just also to rope in our viewers into this conversation, if you're watching this morning, you want to participate, share your views with us. We'd like to hear your thoughts on how we covered this particular story on the Garissa attacks. You watched it unfold that particular day, late into the night, the days after that. What have you thought of the coverage? We'll shortly also be showing you some of the headlines. And also, I remember the headline on this day after the attacks. It elicited quite some debate with some wondering, is it a time to face the facts, or is it a time to, you know, bring the country together? So that's a conversation we'll have. So 22155 is our SMS number. You can tweet us as well at
Sophia Wanuna is her Twitter handle, or you can tweet me at Michael G. Gitonga. Would love to hear what you have to say about that. Remember, what we're doing is that we're looking at our coverage, especially given what happened in Garissa. Were you satisfied? Do you feel like maybe we're insensitive? And yeah, just to quickly remind you who we have in the studio today. We have Patrick Gadara, who is a communications expert. We have Nancy Buka, lecturer at Multimedia University. We have Clay Muganda, who's a features editor, and joining us now is Maura Chege, MCA. Karibu sana. Better late than never, they say.
Is it those roundabouts that got you stuck there? Did you get confused?
And it's our invention, so.
Umepotea? Kidogo tu. We're glad you could make it. Let's come back to Clay. Your thoughts on the coverage, especially on Thursday.
As it's been pointed out, I think probably the media learned more than the government did, and from the Westgate, I think the coverage was fairly good, not very good, fairly good in as much as Gadara points out that international media or the other media houses which don't operate, which are not based in Kenya, actually they had better coverage than us, and this was actually something that was happening locally.
What do you mean better coverage than us? Fox had a headline written that Christians attacked in Kenya. Is that what better coverage is?
By that I mean Fox. Who watches Fox?
It's just one of those. So you need to be specific when you say the international
the ones that operate,
media.
The ones that actually have the presence in Africa. I mean Al Jazeera and CNN and BBC.
CNN had us in Nigeria. Nairobi was a capital city of Nigeria.
That's okay. Those are glitches. We have so many. What happens is that if you listen to these people, if you listen to some of the people who are covering it, they'll tell you that they had a presence there much more earlier than us. And as Gadara points out, that they had pictures we still did not have. I do understand the kind of challenges that local media faces, because some of these things also are driven by the kind of the economy and stuff. And sometimes also before we get to maybe Garissa, there's a lot of logistical problems that we face. What Al Jazeera did is that they actually had their person in Djibouti, but they rely on a lot of stringers. That's what I had Mohamed Ado say on another show. And BBC, they said that by the time she was getting to the office, she had done a lot of links, or we call them hits, from the house. SABC was actually covering, they had the reporter who was in Nigeria, but because she's Kenyan, so this is what was happening. I understand that we have some of the challenges, and then also here, they have a very big team, a bigger team than probably that we do. Like for you to set out to drive to Garissa, Al Jazeera actually chartered a plane to drop their person in Garissa. So these are some of the challenges that probably we face when it comes to coverage of such situations. Having said that, we also, there's this thing, like, I do realize that during elections, we had all these people, all our reporters, hopping from one polling station to another. I would like, I would like to see.
So it's not an issue of resource.
Yeah. So I mean, I would like to see. I mean, in such a situation also, if we could be prepared in such a way. We had our reporters.
You prepare for an attack?
Prepared in such a way that in the event that such a thing happens, okay, we can actually fly our reporter the same way we were hoping from one station to another. I mean, I remember during the voting day.
I think that's different, Clay. To compare the two, it's a bit unfair, because the elections, you know, they are coming. You plan, teams travel, where ahead of time they're stationed there.
It's all about planning.
So by end of day, there were people.
But it's all about planning. I don't refuse.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that it's not about lack of resources. It's not about lack of resources, because we, during elections, we had people hoping. I'm not saying that the coverage was bad. I'm just saying that it can be better. If actually we plan for eventualities.
Although the argument, Clay, would be with a terror attack like this, I mean, you wake up and it's there. You may not have everything ready to travel,
but these
and all that.
these other stations also, they were not prepared for a Garissa attack.
So you're saying it's a resource issue, or it's not a resource issue? Because you start with saying we have a resource issue, then you end with saying it's not a resource issue.
No, what I'm saying is this. You see, like these other stations also, they never planned for Garissa.
Of course.
But you see, one more thing is that they have a list of stringers. We had to probably fly a reporter from Nairobi. You see?
We have our Hamza Yusuf in Garissa.
We had to, many of them had to fly reporters from Nairobi. You see? I mean, Djibouti, Al Jazeera had the reporter in Djibouti who was actually getting information from their stringers and all that. We have one correspondent in Garissa, as you're pointing it out. But these people have so many stringers. So it's all about planning. I mean, we need to look at all these strategic things and see, okay, fine, at what point? Yeah, at what point?
One thing I will add, I think it speaks to what a bit of what Clay is saying. I mean, if you look at the papers and even some of the front page news that was put up, some of it was essentially wire copy, taken from AFP, from AP, etc., which is a bit strange considering this is happening in our own backyard. So I think we need to understand that sometimes our press isn't very good at covering us. That we need to invest in our ability to cover our own stories as opposed to relying on being told or getting copy from
other sources. Yeah. All right, Maura Shege, your take on our coverage of Garissa.
Well, I think when it first started, you were in a show and I was watching, and your first person online was nowhere near a journalist or a stringer, because I remember I think Sophia arguing with him and querying his facts. So I think
I'm not arguing with you. I'm just trying to make sure what you're saying.
Because he was not giving you. I mean, the information was not adding up at the time. I remember. So I think probably investing, as probably Clay is saying, about resources, the stringers, and then secondly, as a response plan, even from government. I think even as government plans to deploy, they also need to know that there should be a media component in their deploying a response, so that the country or the world knows from voices of Kenya or media houses from Kenya that this is what is happening and this is the actual fact. Because with that, then we are left to grouping without knowing specifically who, the actual information that should be coming from the ground that is credible.
Okay, we want to have a look at the papers, the newspapers, the headlines. Director, if you have them, we can start with the one we have first. I think The Nation, then Standard as well, especially on day one. So the Standard headline was what? Kenyan Unbowed?
Yes, Kenya Unbowed.
We shall have that up shortly.
I had it somewhere.
No, this was Kenya Unbowed, and then the Nation had given the statistics.
Had the statistics. What did you think about that, Gadara?
Well, I'm not sure why it caused such a furore, to be quite honest. I'm not surprised by the Unbowed thing. I think we've seen these sorts of headlines in the past. I think perhaps it's the juxtaposition with what the Nation did. I listened to Mohammed Adel saying he preferred the Nation headline, and I would as well.
The one that just put out the numbers out there.
Actually, the headlines were Kenya Unbowed with the Standard, and the Daily Nation was 147 killed, 79 hurt in campus attack.
Yeah, what I have a problem with is when the media goes out and beats kind of the drum of patriotism, of nationalism, so that they are not really disinterested observers, and in that is where some facts and inconvenient ones fall through the cracks. People don't ask the questions because they don't want to embarrass the country. They don't want us to look bad, etc. And I think that in very many cases tends to fog our lenses.
So are you saying then with this headline that this then made the Standard miss the point in as far as asking the hard questions? Because I think they were able to.
No, I'm not saying that. Get what I'm saying? I'm saying that when the media takes these sorts of positions where we are standing with the country, it doesn't just happen here, it happens in the US as well. But what it does over time, it makes it harder, I think, for people to really get down and be critical and ask the really important questions, because they have other considerations, such as, we don't want to embarrass the country, we want to show we are patriotic, so that you had the case like you saw during the Gulf War. CNN fired somebody for suggesting that they were not winning the war, So these sorts of things happen. And as media, you've got to be aware of it. So when you go out simply beating the drum for Kenya, that there are certain things you might be missing or certain things you might be reluctant to surface simply because you want Kenya to look good.
Is there a thin line, Nancy?
Yeah, I think I would beg to differ slightly. First of all, I had no problem with the two headlines. I think, they both had, different agendas. The whole of Thursday, we had, updates coming up on social media, and I think at the end of the day, then, the cabinet secretary then gave, the figures of, those who had, who had died and those who had been injured in the whole attack. And this was at the end of the day. So of course, the Nation headline then comes in to validate, whatever we had been hearing the whole day, presenting the facts as they are. But in such a state, and for most of us, Thursday was a day of despair. You ask yourself, where are we going? What's happening to our country? And what the other headline then tends to do, the pages inside, of course, had the facts.
The details, yeah.
But what I think what Standard was out to do was say, hey, this has happened. But we are still, a patriotic state, appealing to a sense of patriotism, more or less giving hope, in a situation of despair. Because for a number of people, the question at the end of Thursday was, where do we go from here? What's happening? And I guess what the Standard was trying to do in this instance is say, even in this hopeless situation, we are still, a sovereign state.
But isn't that sort of commentary masquerading for objective reporting?
I guess, at the end of the day,
more than anything.
At the end of the day, media shapes public opinion a lot, and when you look at the two headlines, here are the facts as they are, but here is one that is saying, at the end of the day, we are,
Kenya first.
Kenya first, the facts are inside, the paper, and you can get them. So okay. I think the two headlines, serving
two different
purposes.
Agendas. Mwaura Chage, what's your take on? Do you think as the media, we have a responsibility to almost unite Kenyans in a case like this, because from Kenya Unbowed, maybe it was a sense, like Gadara is saying, of patriotism, as opposed to just reporting the facts, which at that time were very grim, given that the country at that time is very discouraged and in a state of confusion. Do we have that responsibility to?
You have that responsibility, and I think the headlines have been going on well in terms of the patriotic part. What I would be probably curious about is how do we move again? Because as she says that you shape public opinion, let's also have the public opinion being shaped in a certain direction. For example, when the president talks about 10,000 recruits being going back to, and is taking that, where is the role of now pushing, say, for forensic labs? These are questions that you should cleverly also tuck in and then force government to take that direction. Because after after a week, we haven't identified all the victims. I think we are relying on only fingerprints. And if the same executive orders would go for forensic laboratories, and I think that would be good in terms of also pushing the discourse to a higher level in terms of what needs to be done, or for purposes of comparing it with other places that have similar attacks.
Okay.
What are the first responses? What do they do? And then now you try and measure where is Kenya. It comes out as a story, yes, but at the end of the day, also people also push government to expect certain steps to be taken.
Clay, are we Kenyan first or journalist first?
I think. Okay, first of all, yes, we are Kenyans.
We are Kenyan first.
We are Kenyans first.
So which headline to you do you?
For me, what is happening here is previously, before the advent of the FM stations and all this, you could have had what we call the special edition. That is what used to happen before. What you're not looking at here, what you're not seeing here is that the standard headline was actually informed by the fact that social media and FM stations and all that had actually relayed all this information the whole day. You see, what Standard did was to have a day two headline on day one. There was nothing wrong with it. What was happening is that, first of all, we're not understanding is that Kenya Unbowed headline was based on the speech Mr. Kenyatta gave when actually he addressed the nation. That is where the Kenya Unbowed thing the headline was coming from. It was actually reporting what Mr. Kenyatta did. You see, because all this information had been, in the media and all that, FM stations and all that, and TV stations like KTN went on until 11. So the assumption here was that people are already aware of what is happening. People are already aware, because previously what could have happened is that you'd have that special edition at 11 or at noon or in the evening. You see, this is what has happened. But this one nowadays does not happen because there's so much. The cycle of news nowadays is faster. FM stations, and then we have social media and all these things, and then so what was happening here is a case where Standard took the story forward on day one. Instead of just reporting or saying like, okay, fine, these are the number of deaths and all that, they decided to refer to take the story as after the president had addressed the nation. Now that is where they got that.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that constitutes taking the
Why?
story
Because
forward.
are we not a country at the end of it all?
So the thing is, it's not about even bowing to the pressure of the government. It was not about that. I'm talking from this point of view as a journalist. It was not about bowing to the pressure of the government. It was about using a day two story on day one, because the first
you keep saying that, but I don't see how it's to say Kenya Unbowed is a day two.
No. And I'm telling you where the Kenya Unbowed came from. It came from the speech of the president.
I agree, but what I'm saying is how does that become a day two?
So to you, we should be journalists first, put the cap of whether I'm Kenyan, Ugandan,
as I said before, I personally, because I've seen many of this.
One at a time.
Standard did not fail to mention the number of deaths. It was not actually. This was not sugarcoating the thing.
I agree.
It was not sugarcoating.
I agree.
So what's
but the
issue?
question here was, as I understood it, was are we first journalists or are we first Kenyans? I think it's a false dichotomy. We are both journalists and Kenyans.
But you're saying,
but what I'm saying is, when I sit down to write a story, or when your editors do, hopefully, they don't let their Kenyanness stand in the way of telling the news. That's what I'm hoping. Because we have seen in other jurisdictions that happen. You know,
In this
so
particular case, did that happen?
Again,
No, I don't
when
think
you
so.
Did
if
it
you ask
happen?
me, as I said at the beginning, I didn't have a problem with the headline. I've seen many of them that way. You know, I'm just saying in general sense.
Okay.
If we keep the media defines itself or its role as encouraging the nation, as etc. It stands, as he said, not me. It stands. There's a risk that comes with that. All you have to do is acknowledge that risk, and then work with it. Fox decides that's its role. It's going to go beat the drum for the Republicans. Fine, that's their choice.
Okay, but
let me just say one thing before I finish, because I don't think he should be allowed to get away with it. He mentions the 10,000 thing, and I was quite happy. Lots of the media picked up on that was an illegal order. So when you say that they should be molding public opinion, first, I've got a problem with that. But secondly, if they are to do it, really they should do it towards pointing out that the government is breaking the law. That it should be stopped, and then asking why aren't the independent authorities, standing up and telling the president, you stay in your corner. This has nothing to do with
say something.
Yeah, I think for me, beyond the headlines, then interrogating the issues, and I think that's now what we need to see. We have moved past the point of, patriotism. Now the media then needs to challenge, some of the institutions that are then not doing what they're supposed to do, challenging, the order, of the recruitment of the police. We need to see that being interrogated. We are unbound, but what is it that led us to this in the first place? What is it that we are not doing right? What are some of the loopholes that have made the country insecure, and I think moving beyond that sense of patriotism now, because if we stick to that headline, then if that's what then drives journalism from that point, or for example the Standard, the questions then would be, what happens? We will spend a lot more time, being very patriotic at the expense of so many other things going wrong. I think it was important for them to say we are unbowed, but beyond that, what are the issues? Yes, what are those important issues that need to be dealt with? And if we are to remain unbowed, then what is it that we need to interrogate? What are the things that we need to interrogate? And those are the important questions that then we need to see.
All right, yes.
Let me say, the way I look at it, for me, the media is not only the newspaper, of course. It's all these other combinations. There's been a radio which is happening, on every hour, every minute basis. There's TV. In fact, newspapers come in much later. And even if you look at the viewership or the readership, they come in, they're the last part of the story being told. So I think for me, the how you followed it up probably was also in line with this story is already out. People already know the figures as we're moving on. Now, on the 10,000 issue, and I think it's been interrogated because I know I saw yesterday something IPOA versus the president and all that. For me, what would be also curious as we interrogate is what other steps needs to take place and take advantage of executive orders, because the president already has said that that he's willing to take the hit on that on that particular issue. So yes, as we interrogate it, what else? Okay, for example, what gaps do we have? What gaps are we plugging in by the 10,000? Did we have a shortfall, and in what numbers and whatever, as with regards to responding to an attack?
So give both sides of the story.
Exactly.
On one hand, that this is defying a court order. On the other hand, there are these issues that we have that he claims to want to address.
Precisely, and even much more that needs to be taking place taking place at the time when we look at how people or other countries respond, best practices really. How do they respond to when they have attacks?
Claim.
I think on the recruitment of the police officers, even just before we get the fact that actually the media has been asking a lot of questions from last Thursday. I think we've asked more questions probably in the past few days than we probably asked in the last 3 months. And for me, I think that is what I would call, in fact, the media has been very patriotic. very patriotic, because let's not confuse patriotism with bowing to the pressure of the government. We've been patriotic in as much as we've been talking to the people of Kenya. We've been handling the issues. We've been asking these questions on behalf of the Kenyans. You see, the Kenyan public. That's why we are, even the issue of 10,000 police officers, the issue of the response, was it slow? Or, I mean, all these things like, why did we decide to take the cabinet secretary and the police chief there first? You see, the media has been asking all these questions. So I think for me, the media has been very patriotic on that front. Yes, it's been very patriotic.
Okay.
And this idea of saying probably that we don't ask questions, I don't think that there is no question that actually this time we've probed almost every aspect of this attack and every aspect of Mr. Kenyatta's order that 10,000 police officers to be. We've probed almost every aspect of it.
I would say no.
We have probed almost every aspect
of it. To be quite honest, Claire,
given the time.
Nadara, what is it that
I think that's quite, and let me preface this with what I said before, that the media coverage has been much better than it was before. You know.
Yeah,
but to
what
say
you're saying is
probed every, I mean, let me give you an example. There is the activities of Kenyans, the KDF in Somalia. Yesterday, Citizen ran a story. It was their top story at 9 about the closure of hawalas in Kenya in certain accounts. You know, because of their links to financing Al-Shabaab. Nowhere in that was it mentioned that the UN itself, the monitoring group, says that KDF activities.
The story is unfolding.
Now here's my point. You keep saying that. You guys keep saying that. It doesn't take you 5 minutes to ask the question that, okay, you're doing this, why aren't you doing the other? It doesn't take you 5 minutes. You know, they broke the thing and they repeated that story about 2-3 times throughout the broadcast.
Actually, it was
and there was even the breaking news.
Yes, it was not that the Chiron had breaking news. So it's
I think that for me illustrates the problem. You know, is that we report what's here now, don't contextualize it. You know, again, looking at KDF in Somalia. I mean, you had the interview with the PS the other day here.
Yes.
You know, yeah, and she went on and on about how Kenya was really pushed to join AMISOM, etc. Actually, I saw how I was involved in some of those things, and I know for sure we were pushing. By December, our own parliament had voted for us to join. You know, we were being dragged on and we were reluctant to go through. She was misrepresenting the stories. But because we don't have the background, we don't question it.
No,
we don't question what we are actually doing. What are our goals? You know, as there, and how is it that they link up with the other security issues we have here today? You know, they go and they say that the bombing that was done after Garissa was done by AMISOM, but AMISOM is not allowed fixed-wing jets. This is in the resolution. Check it.
All right, so we're not.
Those are KDF operations.
Yes, Nancy.
I think let me, just say something that I had said earlier, that as a country and even as media, trying to understand terror, there's a whole backstory to it. We should take a lot of reading, a lot of research, a lot of interrogation, and for us then, either as trainers, as media houses, that then there's need for an investment in resources, in capacity building of journalists, so that they understand the backstory. You cannot just report terror as who, what, where, with those kinds of questions. That having reported the facts as they are, going back and interrogating the issues. I think that's what Gadara is saying, that there are certain questions that are not being addressed. And as I said, we are learning. Each of these attacks, these unfortunate attacks, for us as media and as trainers and practitioners, are case studies, for us to get better. There is a lot of improvement in terms of coverage from the Westgate attack, for example, to this one. And I think we need to appreciate that. But of course, realizing that there is still a lot of room for us to learn. And again, the other challenge is that each attack is different in its own in the way that it is manifested, and that presents new questions for us. But it is very, very important for us to understand what's the backstory. What's the history.
Yeah, and I think those ones come in due course. I mean, you cannot do all of it on the same day,
True.
You can't do all that, as opposed to what Gadara probably expects the media to do that. I mean, I want all these things on the same day, because these things unfold. I mean, even if you look at developed countries, the countries with developed media, even right now there's some stories that are coming out about the things that actually Bush did wrong in invading Iraq. There's some stories that are actually still coming out. They're still asking questions. There's some things, so it takes time. I mean,
Maura?
It takes time. I mean, we cannot have everything at once. And actually, in the process, because some of these things, we are discovering them one by one. And every time we discover, we actually probe. Every day there's something new. So I don't think like we can do everything all at once.
Okay. Well, let me say this. There has to be an element of, and the informative, as she says, the informative part is played very well, reporting what's happening and what needs to happen. But the element of what should we be expecting? For example, clearly there is a migration from Westgate to the Garissa attacks. But for example, if it happens again today, what would the people who are there expect to do, having learnt it from the media? That to me would be more progressive. That have we understood that if for example it happens, God forbid, in a certain place, and I'm there, what happens? What do I need to do? What should I expect the government to do? What do I expect also media to do? Let's play also something that is also teaching or educating people on the practical steps that can take place within a certain situation.
All right, and maybe just to move that question further, and Nancy, you had alluded to this, and looking at it from lessons learned. Gadara, looking at Westgate and what happened now in Garissa, are we insensitive to the victims, especially given that sometimes we are so quick to try and bring this story and put a face to the story that we sometimes ignore the victim per se? Have we learned?
I think it's come a long way from Westgate. I think we didn't see the sort of pictures we saw in the Sunday Nation on the day after Westgate. And that's good. I think there has been, the media has learned a lot, and I think they're trying to put some of this into context. But I think they still have some ways to go, before we can really say that the coverage is tip-top. And for me, in the end, it all comes down to how they contextualize, how they tell the story, and the fullness of the story. And this division that Clay keeps insisting upon, that we say something today and we will feel it out tomorrow. I find it doesn't happen that they feel it out tomorrow. I find that the fact that till today we don't know what happened for 4 days in Westgate, and we're talking about Garissa, that's a problem.
Westgate, even the government does not know what happened.
Precisely, and that's my thing.
No one knows.
These are not the things.
With all its resources.
If we had kept at it, the resources and stuff. In fact, just a guy like me sitting down on the internet and querying some of these things, you find quite a number of resources, that lead you to question the narratives that come out of a government regarding Westgate, and tell you clearly the government has learned nothing from Westgate. That's why Peketoni happened. That's why Mandera happened. That's why, and when I keep saying, have the inquiry, establish what happened, then learn the lesson. These are some of the things that the media should be pushing for.
We can push for these things, but we're not going to hold the government and say, like, you guys come and sit down here and
you help the people hold it to account.
I think we do that. I think we do that.
Your thoughts, Nancy, in terms of comparisons? We are now grappling and dealing with this as something that's emerging with time, these terror threats, this kind of magnitude. UK, America, other countries have dealt and have covered, in terms of their organizations, this kind of threats. When you compare international coverage of terror attack stories like this ones and how we are now getting into this, how are we comparing? How are we faring?
a lot of improvement,
Yeah.
but I had issues with the insensitivity to the victims, you know, some of the survivors. And, you know, I was watching, you know, various channels, and in some channels, they brought in the survivors and, you know, were asking them, you know, questions that I don't think at that particular point they would be in a better situation to, you know, to respond to. You know, asking somebody, you know, now that you took the lotion, are you experiencing any side effects? I mean, how are they supposed to know at that point, you know, whether whatever they're experiencing
She had Hitler.
was, you know, as a result of, you know, taking a whole bottle of lotion, you know, and I just found that to be very sensational. I mean, this is somebody who was holding on to everything that they had, you know, to survive. And when you go out and ask them, do you think you're experiencing side effects? They are not supposed to know that. I don't think they would. Asking them, you know, now, you know, 3 days later or 2 days later, do you think you need trauma counseling? These are people who are trying to come to terms with whatever it is that, you know, they have undergone.
They probably haven't even recovered.
They haven't even recovered. Some of them will wake up 2 weeks later and ask themselves, what was that I went through? Where are my friends? You know, what happened? And I found that, you know, a little too insensitive. I know that, you know, the public wants to know, you know, and we want to see the faces of survivors. We want to hear, you know, those stories. But what are the timelines that we are also giving them, so that we are not, you know, putting them on air for an hour and asking them those questions, some of the questions that in my view were, you know, insensitive.
Okay.
You know.
Maura, your take on that, how do we draw the balance between being sensitive to the victim and giving the story? Because this is, of course, a story that is being told now by a witness, somebody who was actually there.
The way I look at it as a, you know, a watcher and, you know, a layman, it's like there is this story that has to happen about Garissa, and we have, you know, look for anything that we can throw in. Like, for example, if you watched yesterday's news, half an hour, it was Garissa, you know, stripping it into very thin layers of, you know,
if we don't do that, Gadara will skin us.
True, but then again, you know, we have to get this person, we also have to get the governor here, we have to somehow, but we are not getting probably the steps that needs to take us to the next step, in my view. Gara says the government has learned nothing. But if you look at Westgate and you look at Garissa this time round, KDF was not as involved as it was the last time. If you look at even the way, you know, they were communicating, the communication was probably central sourced. But the question of SWAT team, do we need our recce squad? How should they land in a situation? What happens if you compare it with what was happening in Australia when there were terrorists in a restaurant? You know, those kind of comparisons is what sometimes you also need also to put in your story, so that people also, we as media, you're also pushing the government to take a certain direction. When they're saying that recce was ready at 6 but deployed probably at 2 a.m. Why haven't they gotten a fully fledged line of you know, planes, gear, and you know, cameras?
So we don't have a plan.
And those are the questions that we should be taking into account when we are doing a story of that magnitude. Not only the lotions thing, and also bringing the 2 young people and asking them questions. Because if you have those guys for like 20 minutes or whatever, I mean, the questions are going to be, they're going to go anyhow. Because
let me quickly just,
you won't get...
there's one thing he just said, again, he shouldn't be allowed to get away with it.
And I don't speak for government.
He says KDF wasn't very involved in Garissa. There was a story that came out yesterday from AP that says it's actually KDF that said that we've got this, don't bring the Kiss Squad guys, keep them. You know, and they said, we have this, we've handled this. You know, and essentially messed it up for the next so many hours. So it's not true that KDF wasn't.
They were present.
That's not what I said.
The fact is, what happened? The issues you had at Westgate resurfaced again, in Garissa, the rivalries between the police and the military were again in evidence in Garissa. When I say they haven't learned, that's the truth. Kamama himself says that we have learned nothing.
And those are stories you're reading from the media, so the media is doing a good job to bring that out. So as we wrap up on this story...
So the government has not learned, but the media has learned a lot. Do you think now we should take charge of all these operations?
If you read the AP story, then that's nice. I would have liked it.
Just a minute, but one at a time. Let me say this, KDF came in and surrounded the area. I mean, that one was something we could see. And from the reports of the media, when Reki came in, they didn't go directly there. There was some briefing of some sort, and then now they entered.
Just Reki alone went in.
Exactly. So if you say compared to Westgate, they came in and they brought in and got all over. So and removed the ones who the Reki
actually
that was there.
KDF disputes that. They say that they were battling. They actually say, I think it was reported, was it yesterday?
I know it's in today's paper.
That actually they were on the verge.
So as we go along, we will tell you the difference.
The difference.
Know,
all right, so Clay, finally, before we quickly get your thoughts on this graft story, which was the big fiery story, it is now slowly looking like it's coming back. We have Ngilu on both front pages today. But in terms of the linkages and lessons we can learn in how the Western media, again, what had put to Nancy, how they've covered these stories in the past. Because you will hear CNN, I remember when the ISIS burnt this pilot, I think alive, you know, set him ablaze in a cage. They were very specific in their reportage to say, we are not going to show those pictures because we're not here to, you know, propagate and push forward the narrative by the terrorists. Are we clear about what we need to be doing, what our role is in this war against terror as the media? Is it just to report, to ask those questions, or do we have a role that goes deeper and further in setting the agenda? Clay? Oh.
No.
That was to you.
Okay. No, I think what is happening is like this time, I didn't see anybody on social media. Maybe I was not even looking for them. But even on the mainstream media, I did not see that kind of what we probably might have seen during Westgate. I think we're being a little bit sensitive, and the fact that
but there are still pictures being put out.
There were pictures.
There was concern about those pictures of
on in mainstream
the
media?
bodies. No, not on mainstream.
At least on for example, when the government did its really horrendous display of
this one, I think that one the government was just responding to the fact that the government was responding to the fact that the other time we kept on saying you've killed 15 out of the 3 terrorists, okay, at Westgate. Where are the bodies? So I think that's what the government was responding to anyway. I think that's what the government, I think, I am not saying, I don't speak for the government, I think. But what has been happening is that I think even the fact that we did not run the full statement that actually these people gave about painting Kenya with blood and all that, we're understanding the fact that if we give them a lot of coverage, then actually they will have gotten succeeded what they want, because what these people want is that publicity that we've done this, okay, fine, we're going to do this. And I think even international media has been a little bit sensitive. I've not seen, I don't know if anybody has seen, I've not seen even on international media photos of the dead and all that. What I've been seeing are people depicting that, I mean, as a part of showing solidarity. Yeah, that's what I've been seeing, like students in Venezuela. Well, that was happening when Kenyan students were throwing stones because there was a power outage.
Also in South Africa, they did.
In South Africa, they did the same thing. Yeah. So I've not seen, I think we're becoming sensitive, or we're just waking up to the fact that we cannot keep on, these guys feeding off the publicity that we give them.
Okay, final thoughts on that?
I think, you know, in terms of sensitivities, media is a lot more sensitive, and we are learning by the day, you know. Of course, appreciating the fact that this is not something that media plans for. You know, you wake up and you're ambushed like everybody else. And the funny thing is that whereas everybody's ambushed, everybody looks up to you. What's happening? You know, tell us what's happening. So you have to be, you know, be playing above board, you know, where everybody else is waiting for you to provide that information.
Yeah.
So much better coverage. I think we haven't seen a lot of blood in our coffee, front page, bloody pictures. I mean pictures of blood, of bodies, which was sensitive. We have seen, pictures of people being rescued. We have seen pictures of, the KDF at work. Clay is laughing, I don't know why. And you look at the international media and how they also protect, the people that they are covering. I think we have gotten to that point where it's moving away from the sensational reporting, of course gradually, and getting into the facts as they are and interrogating issues. What we would expect to see in the next coming days is asking those hard questions, asking whether we even have a plan on how to tackle terror, because as it appears, all our reactions are usually knee-jerk reactions, which is rather disappointing. As I sit here, I'm wondering, okay, what will be the breaking news today? So what will have happened, as a result of this? Interrogating whether we have a plan. We cannot assume that this is not going to happen again. We have to be prepared. And what we expect to see is media then asking, some of those, questions. But also from a media house's, point of view, is putting mechanisms in place, because for the journalists that cover terror, there's a lot of trauma that they also experience. And my hope is that within the media houses that there are certain services or provisions that would help them be able to deal with the after effects of some of the issues that they experience firsthand, because what we see,
the more traumatized you are, you become battle hardened.
But there are a lot of journalists that are quite hardened.
Terrorism is like a deadly virus that is mutating all the time, and we also need to go ahead of them in one way or another. I'm just tempted to remind you guys of there's a program which we used to watch when we were kids, where this school, 21 Jump Street, this school had guys who were cops within the system. We need to find a way of being ahead of the terrorists. That's basically what I'm saying. How do we recruit? In the event that it happens somewhere, who are the guys we can rely on to be somewhere inside? Our intelligence gathering, who are we putting in places to be able to give us, or to give some first line of some defense of some sort? Because again, look at this, there were 4 guys talking about 147, assuming like the last plane in the 9/11, when guys said no, we are going down, but we are not going down to White House. Those kind of elements of also the public also being raised to know that there are things which they can take, knowing, yes, I'm dying, but you're not going to humiliate us in the process. So I think that also needs, that element of that kind of education also needs to be brought out. Yes.
All right, thank you very much. Gadara, very briefly, your closing
comments. Very briefly, if the question is still what the role of the press is, I think the role of the press is to allow, to shine up a mirror to society, to allow it to see its faults, to see where it can get better, the things it can improve. I think that it's well and good now that security is a main thing. But we go deeper than simply what's happening now, to look at the systemic problems that we have and to interrogate, as Tuka said, whether we actually have a plan. When you've got the chairman of the parliamentary committee on security saying we don't, on defense saying we don't have one, and yet you remember when the president stood up last year and talked about a 10-point plan, how all the media splashed it, even though it had no content, it wasn't a plan.
It was just 10 points.
Yeah, and that's this is my thing, is if the media becomes more serious about its own reporting, becomes more invested in finding out the truth behind what these guys tell us,
can we end then we can actually Gadara get stuck in traffic jam because of the roundabout?
No, but seriously, then actually we would help the country set itself up to prevent attacks in future and even to respond to them in a much better, more effective way than we have seen it before.
I think we'll have to wind it up right there. Director says that we are well over time, but let me take this opportunity to thank you all very much. Patrick Gadara, Nancy Buka, Clay Muganda, and Maura Shege. Thank you so much for coming and bringing to perspective what we've been doing right and wrong, and that helps us improve.
Indeed, thank you. All the best as you get back to the craziness on the roads. Is it to avoid the right or the left?
Avoid the right, keep extreme right to do your youth. It's all confusing.
Yeah, we can get you our chopper.
Just know how to drive.
Just know how to drive.